All right, good morning once again, and happy Easter once again. If I didn't get a chance to meet you during the greeting time, my name is Matt. I serve as the English pastor here. If you're visiting with us, we want to extend a very warm welcome to you on this Easter Sunday. We have been going through the book of 1 Samuel, but being that it's Easter, obviously we're going to be preaching from a different text this morning. So if you have your Bible or your phone, if you would open or type in John chapter 19. This morning, we are going to be in verses John 19:38 and going through John 20:18. Normally I read the text ahead of time, but being that it's a longer text, I will read it as I work my way through it, and then I will give application at the end. The title of the sermon this morning is Following Jesus is blank. And I'll get there at the application. So if you will, open with me in the word of prayer, and we'll read the text, and then we'll jump in. Father, I pray now as we look at the story of the resurrection that you would give us all faith to believe that this is not a fable, that this is not a myth or a good story in and of itself, but that is the truth, that Jesus is alive and he is real and he is here in spirit, and that he offers eternal life to everyone who has ears to hear. I pray, God, that you would give us ears to hear. Give us eyes to see, Lord. Help us to peel back the layer of sin that clouds us, that blinds us from seeing the truth. And God, give us eyes to see that you are real and that you love us and that you offer us eternal life. I pray, God, now as we look at this text that you would work this miracle. In Jesus' name, amen. On Good Friday, 2 days ago, we looked at the first part of John chapter 19, verses 1 to 38. And we looked at the crucifixion of Jesus. But that was only half the story. This morning, we look at the other half of the story. What we looked at there on Friday was that Jesus has been betrayed by one of his own disciples, and he's been delivered over to the Jewish authorities. They want to put him to death, and so they deliver him over to Pilate, the Roman governor. Pilate finds nothing wrong with Jesus, but the people still demand that he be crucified. So Pilate has Jesus flogged, but it's not enough for the people's appetite for blood. They continue with their demands that Jesus be crucified, hung upon a cross to die. And so Pilate, out of fear of the crowds, he has no choice. He delivers Jesus over to be crucified. Jesus hangs upon the cross for several hours. And when God is finished pouring out all of his wrath for all of our sins, for all time, Jesus says this: it is finished. It is finished. He bowed his head and he gave up his spirit. And that's where we pick up this morning. So if you will, follow along with me as we go through our text here. John 19, let's start in verse 38. This is where we left off on Friday. John 19:38. After these things, Joseph of Arimathea, who was a disciple of Jesus, but secretly for the fear of the Jews, asked Pilate that he might take away the body of Jesus, and Pilate gave him permission. So he came and took away his body. Now, this Saturday, the day in between Good Friday and Easter Sunday, is the Jewish Sabbath, which means it's a holy day. And so the Jews had asked the Romans to please finish the crucifixion process on Friday so that they could bury these criminals and bury Jesus on that Friday before the start of the Sabbath. And here we're introduced to this man named Joseph of Arimathea. Who is Joseph? From the other three Gospels, from Matthew, Mark, and Luke, we learn that he is rich, that he's a respected member of the council, that he was good and righteous, and that he had not consented to the death of Jesus and their plan to crucify him. So Joseph goes to Pilate and he asks him, he says, "May I have the body of Jesus?" And why does he ask this? Under Roman law, the bodies of executed criminals were normally handed over to their family. Joseph is not his family. However, in the case of sedition, which is what they're crucifying him for in their eyes, the bodies were left out, usually to hang on the cross for the birds of the air to devour them. The fact that Pilate grants this request is the providence of God. Look at verse 39 to 40. Nicodemus also, who earlier had come to Jesus by night, came bringing a mixture of myrrh and aloes, about 75 pounds in weight. So they took the body of Jesus, they bound it in linen cloths with the spices, as is the burial custom of the Jews. Now here we're introduced to another character, Nicodemus. If you remember Nicodemus, he is a Pharisee. He's a ruler of the Jews. We first saw him in John chapter 3. If you've never read that chapter, I'm sure you've heard of John 3:16, or at least seen that on a sign somewhere before. John 3:16, for God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whoever believes in him may have eternal life and may not perish. It appears that conversation with Jesus had a profound impact upon Nicodemus' life. He comes bringing a mixture of myrrh and aloes, 75 pounds in weight. In other words, this was a costly expense. It may have even been intended for him or his family. Probably was. They wrapped Jesus' body in linen cloths with spices tucked inside. Look at verse 41 to 42. Now, in the place where he was crucified, there was a garden, and in the garden, a new tomb in which no one had ever been laid. So because of the Jewish day of preparation, since the tomb was close at hand, they laid Jesus there. Now, Jesus was crucified on Golgotha, called the place of the skull. It was on a hill. And nearby Golgotha was a garden. And in this garden was a tomb that nobody had ever been laid in. Why did they mention that detail? Because it was common in those days for multiple bodies to be buried in the same tomb. Matthew tells us that this particular tomb belonged to Joseph of Arimathea. This was probably a tomb that he had purchased for him and his family, that he and his family could be buried in when they all passed. But he uses it for Jesus. And there, at the crucifixion, are 4 women. Mary, the mother of Jesus, Mary's sister, Mary, the wife of Clopas, and Mary Magdalene. Now, at least 2 of those women are there when Jesus is buried. They see where he's buried, what tomb he is laid in. So there is no mistaking this tomb. They know where he's laid to rest. After laying him to rest, they rolled a large stone in front of the tomb, and they went home. Look at chapter 20, verse 1 to 2. Now, on the first day of the week, Mary Magdalene came to the tomb early while it was still dark and saw that the stone had been taken away from the tomb. So she ran and went to Simon Peter and the other disciple, the one whom Jesus loved, and said to him, "They have taken the Lord out of the tomb, and we do not know where they have laid him." Now, it says here the first day of the week, that's Sunday. Their first day of the week is Sunday. They rested on the Sabbath, but at dawn on Sunday, soon as the sun peaks or crest or whatever that term is, the women go to the tomb. Now, assuming that none of the names are duplicates, 4 women went to the tomb. Mary Magdalene, Mary the mother of James, Salome, and Joanna. Now, John only mentions Mary going to the tomb, but 4 women went. Mary, who's Mary? Mary Magdalene. Mary Magdalene was one of the women who ministered to Jesus while he did his ministry. And she provided for him out of her own means. She had previously been possessed by 7 demons, and Jesus healed her. The women go to the tomb and they are bringing spices to anoint Jesus' body. Now, either they don't know that Nicodemus has already done this, or they do know and they simply want to contribute and make their own offering to Jesus' body. When they get to the tomb, they discover that the stone, the large stone, has already been rolled away. Matthew tells us that an angel came down from heaven and rolled away the stone and then sat on top of it. And the angels say to the women when they get there, "Do not be afraid, for I know that you seek Jesus who was crucified. He is not here, for he has risen. As he said, come see where the place where he lay." And then they say to them, "Why do you seek the living among the dead. The angels give the women instructions to go home and announce this news to all the disciples. So Mary and the other women run to tell the disciples. Now it appears they encounter Peter and John first, 2 of the 12 disciples, 2 of the 11 now at this point. Now notice, Mary does not fully understand what Jesus has told her. The angels told her that Jesus had rose from the dead, but she is still thinking in the natural realm. Look at verse 3-7. So Peter went out with the other disciple, and as they were going toward the tomb, both of them were running together, but the other disciple outran Peter and reached the tomb first. And stooping to look in, he saw the linen cloths lying there, but he did not go in. Then Simon Peter came, following him, and went into the tomb. He saw the linen cloths lying there, and the face cloth, which had been on Jesus' head, not lying with the linen cloths, but folded up in a place by itself. Now, as Peter and John hear this testimony from Mary, they don't dismiss it. They react to it. They run to the tomb. John is most likely younger, so he outruns Peter, and he arrives first. And when he gets to the tomb, he doesn't go in. He kind of stoops to look in, kind of does this number. He stoops to look in, and when he looks in, he sees the linen cloths lying there. But he doesn't go in, probably out of respect. Now, the linen cloths, why is that detail mentioned? Probably to testify this was no grave robbery. No robber would take the time to unwrap the body and then steal the body. They would just carry the whole body in the cloths. They would wrap it many, many times. And then Simon Peter arrives. For all the flaws of Peter, no one ever accused him of lack of passion or a lack of desire. Simon Peter arrives and he just marches right into the tomb. He too sees the linen cloths there. And the face cloth is folded in a place by itself. Again, this is no grave robbery. Now, this is 2 Jewish men who have seen an empty tomb. That is enough evidence to admit in a Jewish court of law. Now, like all things, 2 witnesses does not prove a matter, but it should give us pause to consider if it's true. Look at verse 8-10. Then the other disciple who had reached the tomb first also went in, and he saw and believed, for as yet they did not understand the scriptures, that he must rise from the dead. Then the disciples went back to their homes. Now, upon seeing Peter emboldened to go into the tomb, John is emboldened to go into the tomb. So John finally goes in. And when John goes in, something happens. John believes. Believes what? Believes that Jesus rose from the dead. It wasn't that the disciples didn't believe that Jesus was the Messiah or that they didn't believe that he was the Son of God. They did believe that he was the Messiah. They did believe he was the Son of God. But it's difficult to understand the concept of rising from the dead. But seeing is believing. They see an empty tomb and John believes. And then Peter and John go back home. They go back home marveling at what happened. Look at verse 11-13. But Mary stood weeping outside the tomb, and as she wept, she stooped to look into the tomb. And she saw 2 angels in white sitting where the body of Jesus had lain, one at the head and one at the feet. And they said to her, "Woman, why are you weeping?" And she said to them, "They have taken away my Lord, and I do not know where they have laid him." Mary still does not understand what has happened. And so she's weeping. She too stoops to look into the tomb. And she sees 2 angels that are inside the tomb. Now, I think it's fascinating that the angels only appear to the women. They don't appear to Peter and John. They only appear to the women. They only talk to the women. The angels ask Mary a question. "Woman, why are you weeping?" Now, Mary has not fully comprehended the notion of rising from the dead. She responds that she's still looking for Jesus' body, but she has no idea how to find it. Look at verse 14-16. Having said this, she turned around and saw Jesus standing there, but she did not know that it was Jesus. Jesus said to her, "Woman, why are you weeping? Whom are you seeking?" Now, supposing him to be the gardener, she said to him, "Sir, if you have carried him away, tell me where you have laid him, and I will take him away." And Jesus said to her, "Mary." She turned and said to him in Aramaic, "Rabboni," which means teacher. All of a sudden, Jesus appears. He is alive. But Mary doesn't realize it's Jesus. Now, the same thing happened to two disciples on the road to Emmaus. We can't fault Mary here. These two disciples, they walked an entire journey not knowing that the man walking with them was Jesus. And it wasn't until the end that they realized it was. Jesus asked Mary the same question that the angels did. "Woman, why are you weeping? Whom do you seek?" Now, Mary thinks he's the gardener. And so she asked him, "Look, if you've taken his body somewhere, please tell me. I will come and get him. I will take care of his body." And at this, Jesus simply says one word, "Mary." And she instantly realizes who he is. Rabboni, teacher. In verse 17 to 18, Jesus said to her, "Do not cling to me, for I have not yet ascended to the Father, but go to my brothers and say to them, I am ascending to my Father and your Father, to my God and your God." And Mary Magdalene went and announced this to the disciples. "I have seen the Lord." And that he had said these things to her. Now it appears that upon recognizing that this is Jesus, Mary clings to him. But Jesus says, "Don't cling to me. I haven't ascended to the Father yet." Now, why does Jesus say this, and what does he mean? There are a dozen theories, but the one that I find most compelling is that Mary is holding on to Jesus as though he's a ghost that is going to appear for a little while and then kind of vanish. She's grasping him, thinking he's about to leave. And Jesus is saying, "Mary, I haven't gone to the Father yet. I'm here. I'm still here." And he's going to stay here for a little while. After his resurrection, Jesus stays on the earth for 40 days. He appears to over 500 people. Now, even by today's standards, that would be considered credible evidence. Jesus gives Mary a mission. "Go to my brothers, my disciples, and tell them that I am alive. Tell them that I will be ascending to my Father." And Mary obeys. She announces to the disciples, "I have seen the Lord." Mary effectively becomes the first Christian missionary to the resurrection. And we'll stop right there with our text. Application. The way that I want to structure the application this morning is to talk about what it means to follow Jesus. If someone were to ask me, what does it mean to follow Jesus? There are a lot of ways I could answer that question, but the shortest answer, what's the shortest answer to this question? What does it mean to follow? The shortest answer, what does it mean to be a Christian? The shortest answer I would give is to follow Jesus. But of course, that raises the question, what does it mean to follow Jesus? This morning, if you are not a Christian, maybe if you even are a professing Christian, but maybe have a misguided notion of what that means. What does it mean to be a Christian? It doesn't mean to attend church. It means to follow Jesus. What does that mean? What does it mean to follow Jesus? I want to give 10 descriptions of what it means to follow Jesus. These all come from the story this morning. I put the 10 descriptions on your PowerPoint for your easy reference. And they're all alliterated for you. I want to go through these one by one, and I'll move swiftly through them. My hope in doing this is twofold. This is my hope and my prayer this morning. It's twofold. Number one, that you would leave here knowing what does it mean to follow Jesus. What does it mean? And number two, that you would follow Jesus. That when you leave here, you would leave a follower of Jesus Christ. My deepest desire for you is that you would leave this place a follower of Jesus Christ. So number one, following Jesus is perilous. Like, man, that's not a good thing to start off with, Pastor. Following Jesus is perilous. We saw in chapter 19, verse 38, that Joseph asked Pilate for Jesus' body. But he does it secretly. Why? For fear of the Jews. Why would he be afraid of the Jews? When they kill your leader, they come after his followers. We even see this in the next verse. Look at chapter 20, verse 19. On the evening of that day, the first day of the week, the doors locked where the disciples were for fear of the Jews. The Jews are afraid. The reason that Peter denied Christ 3 times was fear. Following Jesus is perilous. John the Baptist was killed for following Jesus. As far as we know, all of the disciples save John, the apostle, were killed for following Jesus. James, the brother of Jesus, was killed for following Jesus. So was Stephen and Paul and thousands of others over the past 2,000 years. Now, with that kind of track record, one could have one of two reactions. Either A, following Jesus is not worth it, man. People die for following Jesus. Didn't they teach you in seminary, Pastor, of like how to win converts? This isn't it. You might conclude that it's not worth it. Or B, you could wonder, why are people willing to die in their pursuit of Jesus? If following Jesus is so perilous, why do people do it? Why 2,000 years later are people still doing it? There are still Christians across the world that are being killed. Every single day there are Christians being killed for their faith. Why? Why would anybody do this? One answer as to why the early church did it is because they saw Jesus rise from the dead. They saw him. And Jesus said that if we believe that he rose from the dead, we too will rise from the dead. Now think about that. Can you imagine being given a vaccine for death? Can you imagine if there was a vaccine for death? What would you do to get it? What would you do to get it? Two, following Jesus is pricey. Following Jesus is pricey. Nicodemus was a wealthy man, but he uses his wealth for Jesus. He provides 75 pounds of myrrh and aloes. That was a small fortune. It was a small fortune. Joseph was a wealthy man. He uses his wealth for Jesus. He provides a tomb that he had previously purchased, probably for him and his family. Mary was a wealthy woman. She had provided for Jesus out of her own means all throughout Jesus' ministry. And even at his death, she's bringing her own spices, her own oils to anoint Jesus' body. And they all gladly gave it up for Jesus. Remember the woman at Bethany who broke open an alabaster jar of pure nard, also a small fortune, and she anointed Jesus' feet with it. Or remember Zacchaeus, a tax collector, also a wealthy man, who upon meeting Jesus, he says, I will sell half of my possessions and give it to the poor. And if I've defrauded anybody, I'll pay them back 4 times. Or the early church who was selling their lands and their homes and bringing the distribution and laying it at the apostles' feet. Following Jesus is pricey. Why would people be willing to give up their fortunes to follow Jesus? Now, again, we could conclude one of 2 things. Either A, he is the greatest swindler of all time. He got me. He got many of you. Or B, he offers something far greater than this life. Peter said, we have left everything and followed you. What then will we have? And Jesus said to him, you will receive 100-fold and eternal life. Turns out it's not pricey at all. Three, following Jesus is public. Shepherds are the first to go and tell the countryside that the king has been born. Women are the first to tell the disciples that the king has risen from the dead. Now, this certainly comes with consequences. Many doubted the early witnesses. They ridiculed them. They slandered them. They called them crazy. Even Mary, when she went to tell the disciples, they didn't believe her. They thought she was crazy. They said they thought that she was telling an idle tale. But following Jesus is not something we do in the privacy of our home. Following Jesus is public. It must be public. Even at the cost of ridicule and shame. Maybe from your family. Maybe your boss. Maybe community. And again, you say, why does anybody do this? Why would anybody follow a man that caused me to be ridiculed and slandered and shamed? Why would anybody do this? You could conclude one of 2 things. Either A, Christians are the most confident, courageous, capable, and competent people on the planet, which we all know is not true. Or B, these early witnesses actually did see Jesus rise from the dead. 4, following Jesus is a process. Believing that Jesus is the Messiah, the Son of God, that he died on the cross, that he rose from the dead, all of this, believing that if I give my life to him, I will have eternal joy. Believing all of that is a process. Most Christians that I know hear the gospel 3, 4, 5, 10, 15, 20, 50, 100 times before they actually become a Christian. Before they come to believe the truth. That same was true for Mary. Do you notice Mary is not going to the tomb because she believes that Jesus is alive. Mary is going to the tomb because she believes that Jesus is dead. She's going there to anoint his dead body. It took John walking into the tomb for him to believe that Jesus rose from the dead. Even when Mary is talking to the angels, she still thinks that they have moved his body. Even Thomas, remember doubting Thomas? Even when his own brothers, his own disciples, all 10 of them told him, they said, we have seen Jesus. 10 men that he knew. Can you imagine? Like take 10 of your friends in this church, and all 10 said that they saw a car accident. They all described it exactly the same, and you didn't believe them? Even Thomas says, I will not believe unless I see him for myself. Following Jesus is a process. Now, don't get me wrong. It's a process that must come to a place of decision. We must decide. We must decide, do you believe that Jesus rose from the dead and he is who he says he is? But the path to get there is a process. I say this because so many people dismiss Christianity because they can't get there overnight. Maybe even right now, you're sitting there thinking, listen, Pastor, I hear what you're saying, but I just can't get there. I can't get there. I mean, you're talking about dying and pricey and like, yeah, I just can't get there. It's a process. So what would I say to you? Would you consider to keep coming? 6 months. Just give us 6 months. Wouldn't it be worth it for 6 months to decide if this is true or not? And at the end of those 6 months, if you're like, nah, okay. But would you consider to keep coming to say, you realize your eternity is at stake here. Something happens when you die. You say, no, nothing happens. No, there's no way nothing happens. There's far too much meaning in this world for nothing to happen. Something happens when you die. Something happens. Would you come for just 6 months to decide, is this true? It's a process. It's okay for it to be a process. 5, following Jesus is passion. Mary runs from the tomb to Peter and John. Peter and John run from Mary to the tomb. When Jesus would get into a boat to cross a lake, the crowds would run on foot around the lake to get there before him, to meet him there. The crowds would run to Jesus and they would bring their sick to heal them. The bleeding woman, she threw cultural shame to the wind and pressed in on the crowds to just touch the fringe of Jesus' garment. 4 men climbed up on a man's roof and they tore his roof apart to lower their friend to Jesus that he might heal them. Following Jesus is passion. Now, when you read the Bible, or if you read early church history, you will see people who are passionate for Jesus. There were saints in the early church in the first, second, third century. There were saints that were on their way to be burned at the stake, and they were burned at the stake. You know what they were doing on their way? They were singing hymns. They were singing hymns with their hands tied behind their back as they got tied to a stake and they were burned alive. Now, we can conclude one of two things with that. Either A, they were psychotic. They were out of their mind. Or B, they were passionate. 6, following Jesus is persuasion. We can make an argument that nobody was closer to Jesus while on earth than John. He's called the beloved disciple. It seems like John was always with Jesus. John saw him walk on water. He saw him turn water into wine. He saw him raise Lazarus from the dead. He fed the 5,000 twice. He saw Jesus heal the blind and the lame and the deaf and the mute and the leper and the sick. He saw Jesus transfigured into glory before his own eyes. And when John went into the tomb, what happened? He was persuaded. He was persuaded. He saw and believed. Following Jesus is not blind faith. If you're saying, are you asking me to just believe this by blind faith? No, I'm not. Following Jesus is not blind faith. It's not doing what your mom and dad did. If you grew up in the church and you go to church because your mom and dad went to church, that's not following Jesus. It's not doing what the West does. Well, like certain regions of the world have different religions and the West has Christianity and that's why there's Christians in the West. No. It's not following Jesus. It's not doing what's culturally acceptable in America, even though it's becoming very less culturally acceptable in America. Following Jesus is following the evidence. and then being persuaded one way or the other? Does the evidence point to Jesus dying on a cross and rising from the dead or not? Now, you may not be persuaded. Maybe you walk here, you leave here today, and you're not persuaded. You're like, listen, I'm not persuaded that this is true. I'm not persuaded that all religions are the same. I'm not persuaded that, there are many paths. I'm not persuaded. Okay? But I pray that you would at the very least do what John does. Examine the evidence. Examine the evidence. And decide if you are persuaded or not. 7, following Jesus is pathos. What is pathos? Pathos is a Greek word. Literally means suffering. But in its adjectival form, it's pathetic. I didn't want to say following Jesus is pathetic. Because pathetic in our language means something very different. But the original meaning of the word pathetic, the original meaning is an appeal to the emotions. It's what the word pathetic means. It's an appeal to the emotions. There's a reason that Mary is weeping outside the tomb. There's a reason that when Peter denied Christ 3 times, he went out and he wept bitterly. There's a reason that the woman, when she anointed Jesus' feet, she's weeping over Jesus' feet. Why? Because they love Jesus. When we gather every Friday night and every Sunday morning and every Wednesday in people's homes, when we sing praises and we smile and we weep with one another and we embrace one another, it's not because Jesus makes us feel better about ourselves. It's not because Christianity gives us purpose and identity. It's not because we crave something bigger than ourselves. Why? It's because we love Jesus. And we love him because he first loved us. Jesus does love you. If you have felt unloved in your life by your parents or your siblings or your boss or your spouse or anybody, if you have felt unloved in your life, may I tell you there is a Savior who loves you so dearly. He loves you more than you could fathom. But Christianity is loving him. Christianity is not accepting that God loves you. Christianity is loving him. Eight, following Jesus is pursuit. Jesus asked Mary a question, whom are you seeking? I wonder if I may ask you the same question. Whom are you seeking? Why did you come here today? So, I wonder how you would answer that if I asked that. Why did you come here today? Whom are you seeking? Or what are you seeking? How would you answer that question? God said to his people in the Old Testament that if they sought him, he says, if you seek me, you will find me when you seek me with all your heart. God is inviting you right now. This is an invitation to everybody in this room, to everybody that has ears. This is an invitation. God is inviting you right now to seek him. Now, God knows that we need houses. You're like, I got a lot of responsibilities, Pastor. I got a lot of things I got to worry about. God knows you need houses and jobs and friends and spouses and retirement and food and clothing and healthcare and safety and security and comfort. He knows that we need all of those things, but he invites us to seek him first. And he says, if you do that, all of these all of these will be added to you. 9, following Jesus is personal. Mary didn't recognize Jesus at first. None of us do. How many times has God shown himself in our life and we didn't recognize him? Maybe right now. How many times has God shown himself in our life and we didn't recognize him? It was only when Jesus said her name, when he said, Mary, that she recognized him. Have you heard Jesus call your name? Have you heard it? You won't mistake it if you have. He may be calling your name right now. I don't mean that metaphorically or exaggerately. I mean that literally, He may right now in your mind, calling your name right now. Jesus likens himself to a shepherd. He says, the sheep hear my voice. And he calls his own sheep by name, and they know his voice, and he leads them. Following Jesus is deeply personal. He's not a distant God. He's not a distant God who's far removed from us. He is near to us. He calls us by name. He knows our name. Listen, I am nobody. I am a footnote. I'm not even a foot. I'm a footnote of a footnote. But Jesus knows my name. If I were to walk into heaven, or if he were to walk out on the street, he knows my name. And he knows your name. And he calls it. Do you hear it? Do you hear it? Following Jesus is deeply personal. 10, following Jesus is perceiving. Mary goes to the disciples and she says just 5 words, but they are 5 powerful words. I have seen the Lord. That's what Christianity is. It's seeing the Lord. John the Apostle said that Jesus became flesh and dwelt among us, and we have seen his glory. John the Baptist said, I have seen and bear witness that this is the Son of God. Peter said, this Jesus God raised up, and of that we are all witnesses. Jesus rose from the dead that we might see him and behold his glory forever and ever. Do you see the risen Savior? If not, do you want to? Do you want to see the risen Savior? If so, may I invite you now to pray with me and to ask God to give us eyes to see the risen Lord.